Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. It's a great pleasure to be here today to share some thoughts around innovation and creativity while we're still waiting for a couple more minutes for people to drift in. Maybe those of you who are here, if you could do me a favor, we're going to try and make this session interactive, at least as interactive as we can, given the format and the medium. And one way we can do that is to use the chat feature right down here. So one thing you could do for me, if you wouldn't mind, is just type in the chat exactly where you are in the world right now. So what location, what city, what country you are in right now, and we'll see what type of audience you are and where you're coming from. So I will start. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, just type in the chat right down at the bottom. Just click on the chat. There we go. And let me know where you are. Okay. Go. All right, I see we have a number of us in Switzerland. So we're in the same country, looking out into a very dark evening, a dark night. Norway, it's probably even darker up there. Welcome. From there, Rome, Lena, nice to see you. Hopefully it's nice down in Rome at the moment. Julia from London, hello. And then we have Mark. Mark, I suppose 9 hours difference from Seattle to where we are right now, which means that it's still morning for you. So good morning to you, Mark. That's right, yeah, 11 a.m., terrific. We've got Jesus Valencia. You're a lucky man, my friend. Very nice part of the world. And let's see, we've got between Geneva and Lausanne. Okay, Robert, you're not too far away either. And Arun, New Delhi, India. Arun, it's got to be pretty late where you are. Am I guessing what, midnight? Maybe a little even more than that. So a special thanks to you, Arun, for joining at such a late hour. So we are really spanning the globe here from morning to night. There we go. And we will use Alicia Buenas tardes from Mexico. Very nice to see you here as well. We're going to get started in just a minute or so, but it's so nice to see such an international group here to talk about alien thinking, to talk about innovation, to talk about creativity, and for me to share a little bit of my thoughts on this topic. For those of you who don't know me, I work at a business school in Switzerland, close to where I am right now, that's called IMD, and we focus on really executive education. So our students are managers, executives, people who work in big organizations typically. And one of their big challenges is lack of innovation. There is not as much creative thinking as they would like. So we've been studying this, my colleagues and I, for many years to try and understand what's going on and why is there such a lack of innovation and creativity, and what can you do about it to improve that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Let me just launch a poll, because we can't ignore the fact that we are depending on where you are, we're still in, or in some places, sort of emerging from a very serious global pandemic. And so the question that I want to pose to you is this one. When you should be able to see it, with any luck, this poll question is going to be popping up on your screen at any moment. And the question is very simple. When you think about the pandemic, what impact has it had on innovation in the organization that you work? So where you work, the company that you work. What has been the impact of the pandemic on innovation in your place of work? Paolo, you're in Florence. Very nice of you to join. Thank you. And Elizabeth from Leicestershire, nice to see you as well. So we're getting quite a few answers. I'll leave the poll open for maybe another 20 seconds or so. So have a thought. Maybe it hasn't really changed anything maybe it's pretty much the same as it was before. Some of you may be in a situation where you're innovating less, and some of you may be in a situation when you're innovating more. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now and share the results. Okay, I'm going to share the results. Okay, so you should, if you look at your screen, you should be able to see the results. Bit of a mix within the group today, but the most popular response is that you're innovating more. And that is a common refrain. That's something we hear a lot. Where I work at IMD, we have a research center that I direct on digital transformation and disruption and innovation. And so we're out there measuring, assessing what companies and individuals are doing. And we're also seeing that many companies are innovating more. But there's a significant number, and we see it too here in the poll, that are innovating just about the same. It hasn't really changed that much, and a few companies are innovating less. But I have to say that we're not seeing the level of innovation that we expected to see, given the fact that there's great disruption going on, given the fact that there's more tools available to support innovation than there ever has been in the past. Given all that, we would expect to see a whole lot more innovation than we're actually seeing. All right, let me share some material. I'll be going in and out of a slide deck today. So the topic of the presentation is around how to come up with not only breakthrough ideas, but how to drive them through to breakthrough solutions. So get good ideas, but drive them through to breakthrough solutions. If you do have any comments or thoughts, don't be shy about using the chat. We'll keep that chat window open, and I will be muttering that as much as I can. There's also, as well, in addition to the chat, there's a Q&A box. You see that also on your screen. And if you have a question that you want to ask, then the Q&A is probably the best place to do that, so it doesn't get lost in the flow of comments in the chat. So chat for just anything you want to say, or comments or answers to questions that I pose. And then the Q&A, if you could use a Q&A for questions. We will leave time for questions at the end, but as questions come in, and if I see them, I will answer them as we go forward. Okay, so this is the topic of the session today. We talked about COVID, and we have measured the impact of that on innovation. And what we noticed was, if we think of 3 focus areas of a company, right? So business continuity, kind of keeping things going, efficiency, productivity, cost minimization, and then innovation and growth is 3 topics. We saw, when the pandemic hit many places, so this was April 2020, we're in the field, we saw a big jump in focus on business continuity, keeping the lights on, which is not too surprising. And that stayed relatively high. And recently in 2021, we've seen an increase in the other 2, including innovation and growth. So there's a question there in the Q&A. Thank you for that, Mark. How would you define innovation? Isn't it more of a relative term? So innovation is defined in different ways. In this particular study, we define innovation as reaching new customers or finding new sources of revenue. So it was really based on trying to go out and challenge the way you do things and to do new things. So do things in different ways and do new things, find new customers, new sources of revenue. It's not always defined that way. One of the best definitions that I've heard of innovation over the years of studying it is just 2 words: useful novelty. All right, so useful in that, it has to be useful, right? If it's just new, but really not a lot of value for anyone, can't really call it innovation. So it has to be useful, but it also has to be new, right? So useful novelty. There are other definitions out there, but just for simplicity's sake, that's one that I like a lot. So useful novelty. In this particular study, we're defining, as I mentioned, as finding new sources of revenue or new customers. You know, I work in a business school, and you know, our world was very simple. You know, we'd have people come to our campus. We have a beautiful campus on the shores of Lake Geneva. We got the mountains on the other side, a very nice campus, and people would come, you know, and they would sit in rooms and learn. But you know, our world changed massively in the pandemic, and most of our interactions today look more like this, right? That we have at the moment. You know, usually, you know, as an instructor, I can see you. I can't see you now because of the format of this session. I prefer to see you, but it's a technology mediated learning. So here's a session that I was running. You can see me there at the top. Just a few weeks ago, it was a virtual session on Zoom. And you can see in this picture, there are people there, and they are smiling, and some of them are laughing. Can you figure out why? Why do you, and if you have an answer, just put it in the chat. Why do you think they're laughing? What are they laughing at? Why are they smiling? What do you think is going on here in this session? You got to get your nose right up to the screen to try and see if you can identify why it is that they are laughing. Did I tell a good joke, Rich? I would very much like that to be the answer, but it's not the answer. I did not tell a good joke. They're certainly relaxed, yeah. They're pretty relaxed. Most of them are at home. They got nice backgrounds. They're pretty relaxed. Now, what was happening, what happened here, which, you know, didn't happen very often in the physical world, was that we were Zoom bombed. In this case, we're Zoom bombed by a camel. So a camel joined the session in the middle of the session, still not really sure how it got there, and, you know, didn't participate that much, to be honest, but became part of the general class. So all kinds of things are happening, and I think the pandemic actually is a great opportunity for all of us to do things differently, right? To innovate. But it's not happening as much as I would like. So let's take an example of a restaurant. So where you are now, restaurants may be open, they may be closed, there may be restrictions, but for quite a long time, at least where I live, we no longer got menus. Maybe this is an experience you've also had. And so instead of a menu, what would happen is we'd get a QR code. I don't know if any of you had this. So you get a QR code, and then you use your phone and you put it up to the QR code, and then what do you see? Well, typically what you would see was the menu in some kind of digital format, right? Maybe it's a PDF of the menu or a simple website, and you can see the menu instead of on paper. Now you see it on the phone. This, to me, is a huge missed opportunity to create value for those people in the restaurant, the diners. So I want you to think creatively. So you put on your innovation and creative thinking caps. What else could you provide to those diners? They go in there, they use their phones for the QR code. What other types of value could you provide, could you create for those customers? Once again, in the chat, try and be as creative as you can. In addition, or instead of just showing the normal menu, what else could you do? What other types of value could you provide? All right, so chat, once again, put your best ideas in the chat. Let's see. Mark says consumer surveys. You could see, yeah, assess the satisfaction of people. You know, are they happy or not? Paolo, you could place the order, right? So, you know, you don't have to go through this dance of waiting for the server to come over to take the order. Oh, wait, where did they go? They disappeared. I'm hungry. If you can see the items in your phone, why not order right from the phone? Why not? It's kind of an obvious one. Indicate how popular each meal is among the clients. Robert, for sure, you could have like a running league table, right, of the popularity of the different dishes. You know, this dish is really popular today. You know, it's a number one, number two. You can see what other people are ordering. You could have a game, gamify, right? Zahara says you can gamify. You could vote for different dishes. You could, yeah, you could have kind of make it a fun experience. What else? Come on, think, be creative. What else could you do? What other types of value? Leah notes that you could, yeah, show events. So in fact, you could You could tie in with other types of locations around the restaurant, right? So you like eating here, but then, there's a great bar down the road. You can have a drink. It's a beautiful place to visit, some tourist destination. You could kind of tie up with other locations around you. You could even use this as a source of revenue, right? You could advertise in there. You can make a little bit of money. Let's see what else. Order. Yeah, we talked about that. And pay. Sure, at the end of the meal, you know how it is. You're done. You're finished eating. You want to get out of there. So why not pay? Be able to pay through the site. You don't have to wait for the waiter. Fix any problems. Gift for a return visit. Recipes. Provide recipes. Provide additional information about the meal. Right? I mean, you could not just having text information. You could show pictures. You could show videos. You could show where the food came from, the exact farm that it came from. You could talk about, ingredients, gluten-free, vegan, all this information you could provide. You could provide ratings, right, of different dishes. So you could see which dishes were liked, disliked, and the comments that people would have about them. So there's a lot of great ideas here, and they're not difficult to implement, right? This is not rocket science to do this, and yet I never saw this, not even once. I never once saw this in a restaurant. Now maybe it exists somewhere, but not where I was. And so I think this is not a failure of technology. The technology exists to do this. I think it's a failure of ambition, and it's a failure of imagination and innovation and creativity. So I think there's lots of examples of this right now. There's opportunities to do things very, very differently. And yet we're not seeing it as much, at least that I would like. I think working from home is another example of this. I suppose many of you are working from home right now, and you have been for a while. Well, if you're just doing the same stuff now at your home office that you used to be doing in your normal office, that's a missed opportunity to innovate, to be creative, to do things in a different way. All right. And our data does suggest that those organizations that are innovating right now, because we're in this period of kind of very large, unpredictable change, that winners are being made right now, that those organizations that innovate are seeing performance benefits over those who are not. All right, so Mark has also another question in the Q&A here. What about innovation and reliability? I've seen a number of issues with QR codes, and eventually the server had to just take the order the old way. So yeah, maybe that's the case, that the QR code doesn't work. Have seen that, but most of the time it does. Most of the time, at least for me, most of the time it does work. It's pretty mature technology at this point. Now, the other thing about it, Mark, is that, if it doesn't work, that's not necessarily, a reason not to do it, right? And one thing we learn a lot about innovation is that failure is an important part of that path. So if it doesn't work, that's a learning opportunity, and hopefully you can fix it relatively quickly. Yeah, it may not work all the time, but having the benefits is much more important than not having anything at all. So it's worth the risk. I think that's the point here. And in many times, organizations do give up too quickly. They give up too early when the first results are not as positive as maybe they hope they would be, because they don't anticipate and understand the learning that has to go along the way. All right. Yeah, and I think, Zahara makes a good point. Yeah, we get stuck in that survival thinking. We do see that, right? Business continuity is still important in a pandemic, that we don't, we're stuck thinking, okay, how do we protect the downside rather than, what are opportunities that we can leverage? So we all want to do this. We all want to innovate, or many of us do, but it's not easy, right? It's hard to do, and there are a number of reasons for that, including the fact that we often are prisoners of our assumptions. These are assumptions that we don't even know that we have, and yet they're influencing the way we act. Or maybe you have a good idea, and to use a virus analogy, you have the antibodies of the organizational culture. They're coming in and they're shutting down those ideas, right? They're kind of killing off all the creativity and innovation that you have in your organization. So based on that, a couple of colleagues and I, we've been seeing this for years and years. We wrote a book that was released earlier this year called Alien Thinking. It looks like this, unless it looks like this. And don't ask me why. We have two different publishers for different locations around the world, and they decided in their wisdom to make completely different covers, but the book is exactly the same. The content is identical. So whether it looks like the one on the left or the one on the right, there is no difference. Okay, and in the book we kind of we show we introduce a toolbox that people can use. So any of us, any of you, can use to help improve your ability to be innovative and creative, and not only come up with new ideas, but translate them into breakthrough solutions. And there's two reasons that we use the word alien. So alien thinking, the first is because the first letters of each of the word alien, A-L-I-E-N, they stand for 5 stages in this process, but also because, an alien, imagine an alien coming down to Earth, sees things for the first time. So it's really seeing things with fresh eyes. And that's something we lose, right? Over time, we just don't see things with fresh eyes anymore. In fact, we see through things. So all kinds of stuff around us that is around us every day, we don't see anymore, right? We've lost our ability to pay attention. Like if you go on holiday, your senses are heightened. You're seeing things, you're smelling things, you're hearing things that are all new, right? And that's the feeling that we need to get back if we want to be innovative. Now, the other thing about an alien is, it's tough to be an alien, right? If you look at think about all the movies that have aliens in them, often it doesn't end well for those guys. So it's tough to be an alien, right? So you want to avoid being shot down, right? So how does it work? What are the different stages? The first stage is the A, and that's for attention, and it's just paying much better, improving the way you're paying attention to the world around you. We're not talking about attention deficit here. It's attention surplus, right? Trying to be much better at paying attention to the things that are around us. And as I mentioned before, many of us lose this. We just don't see the world around us the way we used to, or the way it is when it's new. It's this idea of, the opposite of deja vu, right? If you think of deja vu is when you see something and you think, I've seen that before, right? It's the opposite. Like, let's call it vujade, when you're looking at something that you look at every day as if you see it for the first time. Okay, and then there's different ways to do this, right? If you have a scene there, you can, you can zoom out, right? So zoom out so you kind of see the bigger picture rather than getting just stuck in the details. You see the bigger picture, but there's also zooming in, so really focusing in on the details, those details that you typically don't see. But there's something else too. There's this idea of like switching focus, trying to see things in a different way. There's an example we use in the book about this. It's of the food company Kellogg. So these guys who are making different types of food, and one type of food that they make is they make snacks for kids. So you get these snacks, you take them to school, and they wanted to kind of refresh this line of snacks for kids that they take to school, and improve the performance of that category. And they knew what you should do is you should go and talk to people, because that's what good consumer listening is. You go and you talk to, who do you talk to, right? So you talk to the teachers, right? What do they have to say? You talk to parents, and of course you talk to the kids themselves, and you try and learn what you can. But there's a limit to the amount you can learn from those stakeholders. And in fact, they didn't get many insights from talking to those people. But then there's another stakeholder group out there that nobody ever talks to, but yet has a lot of insight around, what kids are eating. what kids are throwing away, what kids are trading when it comes to food. And that's the janitors. And when they started talking to the janitors, switching focus, talking to this new stakeholder group, they learned a whole bunch of new things that allowed them to make kind of a breakthrough in the type of snacks that they were providing for kids, right? So there's an element of zooming in, zooming out, but also switching focus. And this used to take a lot of energy, take a lot of effort, right? You got to spend a lot of time observing people, talking to people at focus groups, and watching them, observing them, and so forth. But now we have digital tools and technologies that can help us. All right, so this is a true story about my hometown basketball team. It's called the Toronto Raptors, and they started putting sensors on the shirts of the players. So they put sensors on the shirts of the players, and then they would run games, or simulated games, and they would measure how the players were performing and moving during those games. So what do you think was the main insight, right? Or insights? Okay, so I just launched a poll. It should show up on your screen. Now, what are the things that they learned that was most useful? All right, so you have 4 choices. All right, so they put the sensors on the shirts, they ran a bunch of games, and what do you think they learned, right? So the choices are: first, smaller players moved 1.3 times faster than larger players. 2, players moved forward in a forward direction only 30% of the time. 3, players that scored the most points moved the least distance. And finally, your last choice is all of the above. All of the above. So give yourself a little chance to vote there. I'll leave it open for another 10 seconds or so. So go ahead and do that. All right, let me close the poll. Let's see what you voted. There we go, share the results. So you should see the results there. We got a winner, big winner, which is all of the above. 52% of you said all of the above. This is unfortunately an incorrect answer. In fact, it was one of those, and only one of them was the main insight to come out of this study. And it was the one that the fewest of you chose. And that's that players move forward only 30% of the time. All right, so this is a surprising result, right? So what they found was that players during games were actually not moving forward. They were either moving backwards or moving sideways 70% of the time. So in the chat, now you have this interesting observation. You're paying attention. What can you do about it? What can you do? Let's say you're the team now, you've got this insight. What's some way that you can leverage this insight, right? So paying attention to the world, that's one thing. Great, well done. Fine, you've got this insight now. What are you going to do about it? All right, so again, chat, put your answer in the chat. I see Paolo says train differently. Yeah, absolutely, right? So how do you think they train? Well, most of the time they're training going forward, right? And that's not only, drills during practices, but also in the gym, right? Which muscle groups are they training? Well, mostly the ones you're using to go forward. They're not spending that much time building muscle and flexibility on the muscles that you use to go sideways or backwards. By the way, humans, not designed to do that, right? We're designed to go fast in a forward direction. We're not designed to do that either backwards or sideways, which means that you get a lot of injuries. Injuries because players are doing unnatural actions. And so one of the benefits of this for the team, in this team, the Toronto team, was actually was reduction in injuries. So the season following this insight, they had the lowest number of games lost to injury among all all the teams in the National Basketball Association. All right, so Miquan notes, yeah, new strategies, right? So it's not about trying to correct the problem. It's not a problem that they're moving sideways or backwards 70% of the time. That's just the way they play the game, right? So maybe knowing that, you could actually change the strategy of the game. All right, so I think there's lots of examples out around like this where digital tools and technologies can actually help you pay attention to the world around you much better. You know, if you want to see rare or small communities, you know, before you had to travel and observe them, now you just go to Reddit and just observe them, or a Facebook group or something like that. These small, interesting groups are easier to observe. Internet of Things, sensors are out there, collect data. So there are lots of ways that you can pay better attention to the world around you than in the past. You know, another example from the sports, this is Nike. Nike produces a range of running shoes, as you know, and some of them are very expensive running shoes. I mean, hundreds of dollars, euros, or whatever for these running shoes. And when they put sensors in the shoes, they learn something very interesting, and that's that it's that more than 90% of the time, these shoes are not used for running at all. They're used for walking. And guess what? They're really bad walking shoes, right? Because the way you walk is different than the way you run. The muscle groups are different. So the design is different. So people are spending a lot of money for a shoe that's actually not good for the purpose that they're using it. So these are great insights that you can get as an organization. So that's A, paying attention. But then the second one, you're going to love this one, and that's levitation. Levitation. And levitation is the power of taking time out, right? Stepping back. You know, and this is a problem for us now. This is a problem for us because we are so busy, right? We have meetings from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. We're on our phones all the time. How many of you, if you're honest, bring this to the toilet with you? I'm sure you're, wouldn't like to admit it, but you do it. You know you do. We don't give ourselves any kind of free time anymore. And the science on this is pretty clear. A brain that is, at rest, so not involved in a tough activity, is actually more active than one that is. So at that time when you're resting, your brain is synthesizing, it's thinking through all the things that are going on, and it's being very creative. We don't give ourselves time to levitate, to take time outs and time offs, then we're not going to make those creative leaps. We're just going to be in execution mode. And by the way, the pandemic is not helping here, because now our interactions, many of our meetings are just very functional, right? We have a 30-minute meeting, 45-minute, 1 hour, whatever, and we just talk about what we talk about, and that's it. We don't have time, give ourselves time to reflect. Maybe some of you are procrastinators. If you're a procrastinator, don't feel bad. Procrastination is a good thing. It's a good thing. Now, take it to an extreme. It's not great, right? You don't want to procrastinate too much, but the process of procrastination is actually very valuable, right? Because it gives your brain time to reflect. You need to take time away from all your activities if you want to be creative, right? It is no coincidence that often your best ideas you get while you're exercising, while you're in the shower, while you're commuting to work, because your mind is kind of at rest in a way, so it's making all those connections. By the way, many of us, if we're working from home, we don't commute, right? We don't have that kind of reflective time, or as much reflective time as we used to. So think about that. Let me skip this just a second. Yeah. That was just a little video and it shows that Bill Gates is a super busy guy. He fills his time with everything, but you don't have to, right? And he found that when he clears his agenda, he's actually a lot more effective than when he fills his agenda, right? Warren Buffett, he's a guy who doesn't fill his agenda, right? He has full days that have nothing in them because he knows he needs time to reflect. There's a quote here from Einstein, creativity is the residue of time wasted. So don't worry about wasting time. It can actually help the innovative process. All right. So we've got through the A and the L. Now we come to the I, imagination. If you want to be creative, you need imagination. You need to be imaginative. And there's a myth out there that only certain people have this, right? That certain people are born more imaginative or more creative than others. There is no science to back this up at all. It is a myth that there's creative geniuses out there and the rest of us are kind of way behind. Creativity is a learned behavior, right? You can train yourself to be more creative. And one of the great ways to do that is to play, right? If you're having fun, typically you're also having a lot of good ideas. And the problem is there that, you know, when we grow up, you know, fun is something that kids do. We kind of stop having fun. You know, companies, organizations are serious places, right? And having fun is like you're wasting time. But if you want to be creative, actually play is really, really important. There's a great quote here from George Bernard Shaw. We don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing. So, you know, rekindle that fun factor in your life and you will be more creative. Gamify things leads to a lot more creativity. All right, here's another, this is the last poll I'm going to launch, and it also shows how you can get insights in ways today that we never used to in the past. And one of the things that, you know, has always been a part of the way we are is how we get together and fall in love, right? How we couple, how we get together as couples. And this has always been, I would say, you know, a very kind of, you know, non-scientific endeavor, right? You meet serendipitously, you get to know people, you click. And so it's a very kind of emotion-led process traditionally. But of course, now that's changed. You know, in places like the United States, between 25 and 30% of couples meet through online dating sites. And there's other countries in the world where the percentage is even higher. And what that gives us is a lot of data around coupling. So coupling meaning people who meet, they fall in love, and they stay together. Okay, they meet, they fall in love, and they stay together. And we have a lot of data about that. Why? Because in the dating sites, if you ever been on a dating site, you have to answer lots of questions, right? So you go on the site, you answer lots and lots and lots of questions, and based on the answers to those questions, you're matched with somebody who's seen as being compatible, and you can test the results. So these dating sites now, after, you know, millions and millions of interactions, have a pretty good idea of what leads to successful relationships. So I'm going to ask you, what do you think is the best predictor of couples falling in love and staying together? All right, so you have this time 5 choices. You see it in the poll there, 5 choices. And what do you think is the best predictor of couples not just falling in love but staying together? The first one is their attitudes about children and family. That's the first choice. Second choice, attitudes about money and finances. Third choice, attitudes about horror movies. Fourth choice, birth order. So this is, are you born first? Are you born last? Or are you born somewhere in the middle? That's birth order. And finally, the closeness in age. The closeness in age as a predictor of couples falling in love and staying together. All right, so think about that. Reflect. On that, I'll give you a few more seconds to answer. Okay, I see Zahara has an interesting comment there in the chat. The brain has time to roam free. I mean, this is why a lot of people, you know, take meditation very, very seriously. It's not that you want to remove all your thoughts, right? You want to allow your mind to roam, right? And that can be the start of many, many creative ideas. All right, everyone has voted who wants to vote. I'll give another couple of seconds, and then I'm going to close the poll. So let me close it right now. All right, and share the results. Okay. So what is the best predictor of couples falling in love and staying together? The first choice, there's a big range here in answers, big range. That the first most popular choice is about attitude about money and finances. Then we have horror movies, birth order, children, and age difference. So the answer is, and by the way, this is not close. This is not close. The answer is the third one. It's the attitude about horror movies. So you know, and by the way, it's a positive correlation here. So if you and your partner both like horror movies, that's a good thing. If you both dislike horror movies, that's also a good thing. But if one of you likes them and one of you doesn't, that's not such a good thing. So I suppose right now you're thinking about, ooh, well, my partner, what do I think? Find out, because this is apparently a very strong predictor of successful coupling, much more so than any of the others. By the way, in case you're curious, the second most best predictor is an answer to the question, would you go on a holiday by yourself? Would you go on a holiday? In fact, I think it's even more specific than that. Would you go on a holiday to another country by yourself? Okay, and that's also very, and you may be wondering, why are these strong predictors? Well, the truth is, it doesn't actually matter that much as long as the data shows that it's true, right? And then you can use that as the beginning of a creative or innovative idea. And that links us to the next stage in the alien thinking process, which is the E. So we've had A for attention, L for levitation, I for imagination, now we have E for experimentation. So experiments now are different than they used to be, right? The old experimental model, right? You take a good idea, you bring it into the lab, you keep it secret, right? You test, and then finally you come out with a product. The problem is, with that approach, that you can often fail, right? This is a good example here, the Segway, an interesting product, very cool, but from a commercial standpoint, a complete failure, because they didn't spend enough time listening to customers, and they kind of fell in love with the idea. Many of us fall into this trap, right? We fall in love with our ideas, our concepts, our products. So challenging yourself is a really good goal of experimentation. So experimentation is not just about proving something is right or wrong. It's not just about testing a hypothesis, but it's about improving something, right? So in fact, the experimentation process is a continuous process of improvement. You're constantly learning, testing, getting feedback, and not worrying too much about your idea being secret, because you're going to get a lot more benefit from sharing than you are from keeping it alone, keeping it by itself, right? And there's lots and lots of evidence to suggest that. Here's an example. Do any of you know where this is? And if you do know where this is, just type it in the chat. What is the name of this town? Do any of you know where this is? Thomas knows, and he's absolutely right. This is the town of Montreux. It's in Switzerland, very close to where I live. And if what you can see in the background there, you see this road going kind of next to the hill. Like behind the town, there's this road, and it's kind of set up there on the edge of the mountain. And this is the main road from, you know, a lot of the French part of Switzerland and some part of the German part of Switzerland too, into the mountains. You see the mountains in the distance there where there's skiing. So that road tends to really bunch up on holiday weekends in the winter, and particularly in the winter. And so what happens is that people start driving through the town of Montreux, and which is causing havoc with the traffic there. So the cars are going from the highway down into the road. So how do you fix this? Well, typically what you do is you put things on the ground on the road that would measure the cars going across, and you have people in yellow jackets, gilets jaunes, yellow jackets, making notes and so forth. This is time consuming, it's expensive, and it could be relatively dangerous as well. All kinds of accidents can happen. Now, there's a way around this. There's actually a way that you can get all this information about traffic flows without putting down any lines on the, any cables on the road, without having anybody standing on the side of the road counting cars. And can you imagine what it is? How can you get this information without any of that? Well, this was actually an opportunity that came to the biggest Swiss telco, which is called Swisscom. They have 60% market share. And what they realize is that because they have 60% market share, that when people are using their phones, you can track them, right? And you do it anonymously, but you can see how people are moving. So now, they have a new consulting practice and a new line of revenue where they're selling this information to cities like Montreux. And Montreux, it's a big benefit for them because instead of building a tunnel or a bridge, they now realize, wait, we can solve the problem just by rerouting traffic, changing the traffic lights and adding a small, lane here and there. So actually solved largely the traffic problem without any major investment. So again, there's this big kind of digital way of experimenting. Another way is a digital twin. So instead of flying a plane to test the plane, you can just create a digital version of the plane and you can test that. So the great ways of creating trial without error by using digital twin technology. You can also use A/B testing, which happens a lot in software and websites and so forth, where you make a very, very small change, but you're continually changing and testing the results of small changes. So eventually, it turns into big changes, right? But only a small step at a time. So experimentation can be done in a very, very different way today. All right. Finally, we have the N, and the N is really, really important. And honestly speaking, it's overlooked in many innovation methodologies. The innovation methodology is about coming up with a great idea, but you've got to take that idea and you've got to translate it into a breakthrough solution, which means you've got to convince people about it, right? You've got to, if you think of an alien coming down to Earth, that alien has to navigate, right? Navigate the landscape. And that's, a matter of, stakeholder management, understanding the needs of stakeholders, anticipating potential complaints, barriers, blockers, trying to bring people on board earlier, using language that they understand that's not threatening. Sometimes it's about going under the water or under the radar. Sometimes, it's figuring out the best time to come out with your idea. And there's some classic mistakes here. And one of them is Dyson, James Dyson, who are very, very famous now with the vacuum cleaners and the hair dryers and all that. Well, when he started, he had this technology of using, wind and air to a vacuum to remove dust. And he went to the big vacuum cleaner companies and sold this as the bagless vacuum, right? So, a bagless vacuum is exactly what it is. There's no bag, but this is not a great way to sell the product to a company that makes a lot of money from selling bags, right? And so it was a misinterpretation of the value proposition, the utility function of the customer. Another good example is Kodak. It's a well-known example, right? Kodak invented the digital camera, and here's the guy with the first one, and he sold it internally as filmless photography. Okay, that's what it is, but not a great idea. If he called it digital photography, maybe it would have garnered more interest, but filmless photography for a company that sells film, probably not a great idea. So the navigation process, we talk about it a lot in the book, is really tricky. And sometimes innovators, people who come up with great ideas, they can be good at doing that, but not very good at that navigation. And a lot of great innovative ideas and creative ideas actually fail at this navigation stage. All right, we've got 10 more minutes, and I want to make sure that there's plenty of time for questions. If you have any questions or comments in the chat, while you're thinking about any questions that you have or any comments that you'd like to share, I think it's important to note that even though I talked about these 5 stages sequentially, that is not actually how they work in practice. It doesn't always start with A and go through, L, I, E, N. A creative idea, a breakthrough solution could often start with levitating, start with, while you're taking a timeout. It can start with a creative thought from your imagination. It can start with an experiment. And so there's, and then it can move on in a different sequence. So it's really not and that's one of the issues with a lot of these innovation methodologies today, quite frankly. They're very linear, right? First you do this, and then you do this, and then you get post-it notes, and then you do that. This tends not to work very well, because when you want to be creative, you don't want to have to remember all these steps. All right, so if you do have a question or a comment, please share that. Now, Mark has a question I see in the Q&A. Thanks for the presentation. One question around navigation is, what is the best way to introduce new ideas to others? When is the best time to do this? Right. That's a very good question, Mark. So it's good to really think carefully about how, right? So the how part is really, really important, and often doing it in a way that's not threatening is the best way forward. So you're bringing in your idea in a way that solves somebody's problem, even if it doesn't, right? At least you're kind of pitching it in a way that shows a benefit to them. It's often not a good idea to share too early. We're talking about the timing. You want to develop an idea a little bit, right? You want to stress test it. You want to maybe create a very early prototype, or test with a bunch of people outside the organization first. So you've had some time to refine it before you go with the idea internally, but you also don't want to wait too late, right? It doesn't need to be fully formed, because the problem there is often it's irrelevant after a while. So if you wait too long, it's no longer, the idea is no longer as valuable as it used to be. So I'd say that don't go with some kind of half-baked, first thought. Stress test it a little bit, play with it a little bit, run it through these different stages a little bit. Spend more time than you think you need to understand the stakeholder landscape, right? Who has what to gain by this, or who has what to lose by this, and then come in, when it's at a relatively developed stage but not fully formed. I think that's, and of course that, Mark, it really depends on what industry you're in and so forth, what situation you're in. All right, any other, I see some comments there in the Q&A. Any questions, any other questions? I think there's one, while you're thinking about that, there's another example, of course. A small world is based around travel. It's a travel community, and we've seen a lot of changes in travel in the last 18 months or so. I used to travel about 250,000 miles a year flying, and I think the last year I've been on 2 planes. So, and maybe for many of you have a similar experience. So it's been a really tough time for airlines, for example. So one really cool creative idea was, I think it was Qantas who did this first. Some of you may know, maybe someone else, but the one that was kind of commercialized most was Qantas. This guy had a trip to nowhere, which is not a trip to nowhere at all. Basically, it would take off in Australia, it would fly around, the Great Barrier Reef or Ayers Rock or whatever, for a few hours. You could look out the window, and then it would land in the same place it took off. And nobody really considered this as a possibility before for commercial airlines, but it was super popular, right? And people thought, wow, these things sold out in minutes. But then after a while, there was a little bit of criticism, people saying, geez, that's really not good for the environment, right? You know, you're just flying nowhere. You're just flying and then you're landing in the same place and burning all that fuel. That's not very good for the environment. So what do you do in this case? So you know that this idea is popular, but you're also a little bit concerned about the environmental impact. Well, what some airlines started to do was actually not fly anywhere at all, but allow people to go in the planes. And it turned out that this was actually really popular, that people who normally don't fly very much, or certainly don't have a chance to fly business class or first class very much, really enjoyed and were prepared to pay for just sitting on the ground, watching a movie on a plane, you know, having a meal, having a drink. And so this is a way for these airlines to replace at least some of the lost revenue. Again, it was a creative thought that then was translated through experimentation into a kind of a breakthrough type solution, taking advantage, again, as we talked about earlier, of all the opportunities to innovate in the pandemic. All right, we are just about out of time. This is your last chance to ask a question if you have one. I'll share these slides if you want to get a copy of these slides. We have a bunch of additional reading on the different pieces. Finally, I would say, you know, a final comment. If you want to connect, I'm very happy to connect with you. You can see, just use your phone. There's a QR code there that will connect us directly on LinkedIn. All right, I think at this point, as we're nearing the top of the hour, I'll once again thank you all for joining from all different parts of the world. Hopefully you've taken something of value, something interesting away from this session. And I wish you all the very best as you move forward and trying to create great ideas and also translate them into breakthrough solutions. I'm not saying we have all the answers, but I think we have seen, if you follow these steps and you kind of refine your ability to do these things, to levitate, to pay attention, to experiment in different ways, to be imaginative and navigate, then you will have more success in innovation and creativity. All right, Paulina from Moscow, thank you for the thank you. And to the rest of you, have a great rest of the morning, afternoon, or evening. And if you're in New Delhi, get some sleep. All right, we'll call it there. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much for tuning in. And I hope we have a chance to see each other physically or virtually again sometime in the future. All right, bye for now, everyone.